When we think about India and Pakistan, at this point, it seems really obvious that the two countries are so different. But your book was really eye-opening because in your book you talk about how at a certain point the militaries of the two countries really diverged. Can you tell us a little bit about the impetus of looking at this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Aunohita. Bangalorean, but now exported to Delhi. And I want to use the idea of exporting in response to your question, because for the multiple reasons and very complex reasons that our democracies, our militaries, our civil-military relations have moved, I have argued that at the heart of India going the way we have has been a commitment to constitutionalism. And when I look at our immediate neighborhood now and everything that's brewing in Bangladesh, in Pakistan for a long time, in Sri Lanka, etc., I think we are at a position where we can actually speak about exporting our idea of constitutionalism with all of the challenges and the failings that we've had, especially in the recent past. But to return directly to your question, look at I think the early years have defined both countries. I don't have time enough to go into the detail, except to say that in the first decade of both India and Pakistan, we had a constitution in place. We had a commitment to the idea of constitution, which is more important than just having one. And we had a military that was professional, apolitical, and very consciously kept away from politics and policy making, which came from an ideology that the establishment believed that the military was really a remnant of the empire. It had no role in the freedom movement, and therefore its position in new India's governance would be most limited. Whereas in Pakistan, it was diametrically opposite, which was that there was no constitution till 1956, by which time the damage had already been done. There was sectarian violence, there was division, there were basically bureaucrats running the show, there were no elections held, and it was in that vacuum that the military was invited upon the imposition of emergency in Pakistan, which people have said was the day democracy died. That day was 28th October 1954. So imagine to have that sort of certificate that democracy died as far back as 54, and you never really recovered from it. And you didn't because an extra constitutional institution, which is the military, was invited to quell the riots, etc., but in the process became a sort of a nationalistic, stable, and a credible force to reckon with, which every common Pakistani at one level accepted. And once it was in power, it was really never going to yield space. And as Pakistan's history has shown, though Pakistan was able to have thereafter two more constitutions, the last being in 1973, the initial tradition that was set, which was of the military being in power, has continued to define its identity.
For those of you, as Aditya said, he may not have enough time to talk about everything, but the book will be there. It's an excellent book. One of the things you talk about is, of course, the path not taken, and you give credit to the Indian Army for the things it didn't do, adventurism, some getting into civilian space. And you've talked about how this has shaped the two countries. But what is the impact of the way the military, the road the Pakistan military took on shaping us as a country?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In many ways, we have shaped the narrative in Pakistan. And by that I mean that one of the prime justifications for the military in Pakistan to claim its right to govern, ironically, because militaries are not meant to govern, regardless of what's happening happened in South Korea briefly, etc. The legitimacy for the generals to sort of stay in power or stake a claim to be in power over their civilian counterparts has essentially been the India factor. To say that India is out to undo partition, that India was responsible for the severance of East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, and that there is a constant Kashmir issue which is on the boil, and the only sort of institution or the only credible mechanism to quell the challenge from India is the army, and that has remained historically the basis for the military to stake a claim to power. As to how Pakistan has impacted us, look, I would say it would be in a limited fashion. As far as Kashmir is concerned, of course, we're always on the boil, we're always in conflict. Our military ops historically have always been focused towards Pakistan, which cost us in 1962 because we didn't pay heed to China. But beyond that, I think when we return to simply the role of the military in a non-combat, non-war scenario, I think India was very conscious, especially in the initial years of everything that was happening in Pakistan. So in the 50s, when Field Marshal Ayub Khan had his coup, usurped power, stayed in power for a decade, that was precisely the time that New Delhi was paranoid that something of that sort could happen in India. And that led to counter-coup measures. The bureaucracy in some way was seen as a buffer between the politician and the military. And that led in some ways, in the early decade, to a great sort of friction and alienation in the relationship between the armed forces and the government. But as I have tried to argue in my book, two things have happened without stretching this too much. One is that there have been instances historically and even more recently where the army was in a position where, had it been Pakistan, there would have been a far more overt political reaction. The other thing, which is a positive development, is that we learned from this and realized that the likelihood of a coup in India was a non-starter. And as a result, we were able to mend civil-military relations into the 70s and onwards, so much so that the military has become almost subservient now. And the other thing, which I began by saying, was that this created space in the democracy. The military keeping out, what I say is a non-event, keeping out, created space for us to experiment with our institutions, with our commitment to the Constitution, and ultimately sort of move forwards. You don't become a constitutional liberal democracy overnight. You make your mistakes, you experiment, and creating space, I think, is important. And there, maybe inadvertently, the Pakistan factor would have rubbed off on us.
Ambassador Raghavan, staying on Pakistan, I want to come to you and your book. You've also said that you had to think when you began writing the book because, of course, there's reams and reams that has been written on Pakistan and consumed within India as well. But do you think Pakistan is over-reported and perhaps understood?
Well, first of all,
within India.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for having invited me and given me a chance to talk about South Asia and Pakistan today. I would say that perhaps if you had asked this question, say 8 or 10 years ago, my answer would have been an emphatic yes. Now, the position is much more ambiguous. Certainly in India, there is a sense today, which is not often articulated upfront, but there is this broad sense that we have graduated to a different orbit where Pakistan is concerned, and more generally that we have graduated to a different orbit where the whole of South Asia is concerned. In a more direct sense, it is the China debate which dominates conversations to a much greater extent than it had previously, for obvious enough reasons. So I would say yes, I think the interest in Pakistan is less. To some extent, it's a healthy development because in the past, there was almost an obsession with Pakistan. But to some extent, it's also a negative development because to think that we can go to...
When you arrived there, two things. One was an idea of Afghanistan. And the second is the idea of reporting from a country of conflict, in the midst of that conflict. Were your ideas before you went there and after you actually arrived there, were they very different?
Well, thank you firstly for this opportunity, and thank you, Aunohita. I'm honored to be on this panel. To come to your question, yes, that is basically why I always believed as a reporter to be on the ground rather than sitting in Delhi and getting fed by, few kind of speaker that we have there, the speaker ecosystem there in Delhi. So yeah, I mean, my decision to go to Afghanistan, and I was at that time in a different media organization, and I'm thankful of my editor back that time who believed that, yes, you can go and do some reportage, but what I really, when I landed there on 8th of August 2021, what I realized is that we've been only reporting and reflecting what the New York Times or Washington Post was telling, indirectly telling us to write that, oh, there is this peace deal going on, the Taliban will never come to Afghanistan back, the US troops is going to, they are going to be there. They will not desert you and all that. But when I landed there in Afghanistan, I realized the very first day in Kabul, things are totally different, and we really do not know even half the truth that was being played out there. The Taliban at that time was already there. It was just a matter of days when they would just come in and announce to the world that we are here. The Afghan forces by then had already given up. I had gone to Mazar-e-Sharif also on the front line where the Afghan forces were trying their best to push back the Taliban, but they failed. There are various stories, and I would really request you to read the book where I have, spoken some of the facts that we, in our daily reportage, we don't really like to write about all that because it doesn't fit in a certain narrative. But then the reality there was totally different. When I was in Mazar, the people there told me that, and I was wearing my bulletproof jacket and, all sorts of safety gear, and they said, why are you even wearing all this? If you're there in the ground, if you want to get the real voices, you need to, get rid of all this and mix with us and really ask the genuine questions. So I realized that, yes, that is how one should really do ground reportage. And there the people told me that, why are you so opposed to Taliban? Why do you think we will look at them as villains? We don't. We see them as our brothers. So that was quite an eye-opener, at least for me, to even think, maybe today when I go back there, and I hope I go back, maybe things would be different. But at that time, they were very clear saying that, at least sitting in Mazar, one of the imams there in the Blue Mosque told me that, what have the Afghans given us, the Americans, what have the Russians given us? So give Taliban another chance. So I think at that time, there was this hope that it'd be a Taliban 2.0 who will be different, but we now see what's going on 3.5 years down the line. But that is why I think ground reportage is extremely important. I was there in Bangladesh also after all that had happened on 5th of August, and there it was again an eye-opener for me to go to Dhaka and nearby places to see how we are sort of losing the grip in our neighborhood, which is extremely unfortunate, which is, I think we need to really think very seriously. We can just say and do a few things on social media and talk about what we want to talk, but the reality is extremely different. We are losing our grip. The goodwill that we had as Indians there is also sort of fading away. In Bangladesh, it was really painful to see even a 6-year-old little girl holding an anti-India placard. Even a 90-year-old rickshaw puller, he's also anti-India. Everybody there seemed so anti-India. And everybody had their own sort of reasons. So, well, I have my own opinion, but for a reporter in me, I had to report all that. And tell the world that, listen, things are really not good in your neighborhood. Pakistan, we have experts out here, they know the best. I was recently there for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization where, we had the opportunity to meet the former PM Nawaz Sharif. He met a few media delegations, then I was part of it. And he said that, why don't you talk to us? Yes, we have issues. Yes, we will remain adversaries, maybe for, forever, but you need to talk. So, and I think I totally agree with Ambassador Raghavan that, you have to talk. There is no other option. So yeah, I mean, even in Nepal also, there is, it's not the same Nepal anymore where people will just jump on and say, oh, you're an Indian who has come. They'll always look at you with, especially, journalists are anyway never welcome anywhere. But so they also say that, why are you here? Why aren't you writing on Manipur? Why are you bothered about Nepal? So all these things are happening in our neighborhood, and I think we need to really gear up and have a very solid policy when we talk about neighborhood first.
So Nayanima, pulling no punches, I think you've come to the heart of what we should be discussing today. I think as a journalist, my experience of how people see us in the neighborhood, having lived in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Afghanistan, very much mirrors what you said. I want to, before we get into India's unpopularity in the region, I want to talk about Afghanistan because maybe it is a place where Indians are still loved. At least that was my experience. And I believe Shah Rukh Khan saved you from a very hairy situation.
Well, I mean, I'm the last one to talk about Bollywood, and I do not watch films at all for certain reasons. I mean, I was the way I sort of, don't like movies, but in one instance, I believe, yes, the Taliban is, Shah Rukh Khan is very popular within the Taliban and Afghans, of course. So, in the airport, when people were watching all those scenes, people falling from aircraft, I was there stuck because thanks to our embassy there, they told me early morning, go to the airport, Air India will come, you can take the ticket and my office was kind enough to book a ticket of Air India for me. They said, just come back. And I said, I don't want to come back because I know the situation is very bad. So I reached the airport there at 4 in the morning and I realized there is no airport anymore. There was, there were bullets, blood, and people were crying. Everybody was trying to go to the runway. There were no terminals anymore left. And I was there 10 days back when it was a fully operational airport. So there, the Taliban was stopping people from go out or go in. They were also in a mess because it was their first day to sort of govern the country, so to say. So they said, where are you from? I said, India. They said, they just made a hand gesture that you can't go. I said, Shah Rukh Khan. They said, oh, bada. So, you can go. I'm like, okay, great. That's quite a, this thing I have. But one incident I'll tell you, in Mazar-e-Sharif, I was stuck again in the airport on 12th of August. I was about to take a flight back to Kabul, and suddenly they closed the door of the airport, and my flight was supposed to leave at 10 o'clock. It left finally at 2 in the morning. Because they said that the Taliban is coming. And within 2 days, Mazar also fell. And so I was sitting with this bunch of girls there who were planning to come to Kabul and then come to Delhi and get admitted in Sharda University there. That's what they told me. They said, India is this place where we see hope. And they were also very upset that a day before that, India had shut down the consulate there. They said, you're the only friend that we had in Mazar. Even there you are shutting down. Why are you doing so? I mean, our Ministry of External Affairs gave the reason that, of course, there were security threats. Before that, we had shut down 2 other consulates. That was because of COVID. But I think we all know the reasons behind that. But then they said that, when I'll be in Sharda University, one of the girls told me, one day I'll go to Mumbai and I'll go to look at Shah Rukh Khan. I can stand in front of his house. So, and then they said that, this is how India to us, music, Shah Rukh Khan, Deepika Padukone, and these 2 are very popular. They've forgotten Amitabh Bachchan, by the way. So, so it
Move
was
with
quite
the
a thing.
times.
Yeah,
Move with
so
the
at that
times,
night, yes, again, Shah Rukh Khan was popular in Mazar, and finally the flight landed.
Well, we're very glad you made it back safely. Nayanima was talking about how perceptions change when you're on the ground. I want to go to Aditya, who seems to, without being on the ground, have included a chapter on Bangladesh much earlier, which speaks to some of the developments happening now. You've examined in this book, there's an entire section on the Bangladesh military and its relationship with the civilian government. And your chapter actually ends with, let's see what happens in the future. And in the future was, of course, that the military finally took control, and they perhaps have stepped away from direct interference in governance. But how did you even kind of calculate that this is a possibility?
As much as I'd like to take credit for it, I frankly didn't see this coming. With the long view on Bangladesh's history, the early half, of course, had violent and overt military coups, military rule. But over the last, say, 20, 25 years, Bangladesh's experiment with democracy proved to be far better than Pakistan's. And one could have assumed that that would be the blueprint for the days to come. But the conclusion or the lesson really there is that ultimately civilian leaders, both in the East and the West in Pakistan, have proven to be greater dictators and autocrats than the military generals. That's the great paradox in both countries. If you look at Pakistan, Bhutto was, even Nawaz Sharif, especially Bhutto, was regarded as being very autocratic, very, very authoritarian, and brutal even with his governance. And that's unfortunately what happened with Bangladesh, that actually the mandate was there. And as I say in my chapter, they were moving towards a better economy. Economically, Bangladesh is doing well. Their engagement with the institutions, with NGOs, with civil society was actually very progressive. But on the other hand, the suppression of the media, not listening to the student movement, not listening to the voice of the people, and Sheikh Hasina is sort of running away with the discourse and alienating her own people has cost her, unfortunately, and this is really the heart of my book, that the moment we forget or are unable to respect our civilian space, our constitutional traditions and principles, we create these crises within our system where extra constitutional bodies can then step in. And with Bangladesh, the inheritance is that from Pakistan, which is the military. And of course, the military right now has taken a step back because it's reading the tea leaves. It can see that the students have been very clear that the military will have no role in it. But at the same time, one can never take that status quo for granted. And as we speaking of our relations with our neighbors, we have given political asylum to Sheikh Hasina. That's going to be a huge factor in our relationship with Bangladesh, what Nayanima says. One of the key reasons that Bangladesh is now so angry with India is that we're seen as having had something to do with this. And to not only with this, but as I said earlier, with the very liberation of Bangladesh. So there are two schools of thought in Bangladesh. One is that which endorses the formation of Bangladesh and the creation of a new state, but equally there is one which feels that its separation from the West was sabotage in which India was involved. So there's that baggage as well. So we're going to have to actually tread this very carefully. This concept of caretaker government, again, is unique, right? As much as the constitution in Bangladesh enables caretaker governments, they're still unelected, non-elected bodies. And however good a person, Professor Mohammad Yunus may be, he's not an elected leader. And quite honestly, these arrangements should be stopgap. They can't be for all times to come. And the longer you continue this status quo, the more people lose faith in democracy, the greater role or room there is then for the military to sort of claw back in.
Staying on Bangladesh, Ambassador Raghavan, today, the 14th of December, is the day that Bangladesh commemorates the intellectuals who were murdered in the 1971 Liberation War. From there, where we were clearly a good friend to Bangladeshis, to where we are today. When Sheikh Hasina was ousted from power, the reaction in the mainstream Indian opinion was very pejorative and dismissive, both of the losses of lives of the students as well as what had happened. Why do you think our relationship with Bangladesh, and I'm not just talking about the government-to-government relationship, but people-to-people relationship, why is that where it is today?
Well, I think Aditya is quite right that there have always been two points of view in Bangladesh, but we in India somehow gave an excessive importance or an exaggerated view to one particular point of view, which was that 71 was something which was a reflection of 100% consensus in Bangladesh, which it was not. It was a civil war. And that other point of view, which views the breaking up of Pakistan not as something which they want to reverse, but nevertheless as something of a tragedy, because there was this sense of Islamic fraternity which was violated for various reasons, and they see that moment as one of great loss. That is a point of view, and it has always been a point of view. So this question of how are we in this position today is not a new situation. We faced a similar predicament in the mid-1970s after the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and thereafter in the 80s and also in the 90s. So it's one which we have confronted periodically. I would say that we have to acknowledge the fact that there are different points of view, and not all points of view in your neighborhood are going to be to your liking all the time. I think if you reduce factors in your neighborhood to one between democracy and authoritarian governments, it won't take you very far, because these are large countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh. They're not going to follow the Indian template all the time, and we can't offer our own constitutional provisions to them as a solution, because it just won't work. It didn't work, for instance, in Sri Lanka, where our approach to the major federal issues they faced was to point to our own federal provisions in the constitution. It didn't work. I think if you look at this part of Asia, there are two other models which are very, very relevant. One is in Myanmar, again government, military rule, but a particular form of military rule. And the other is in Thailand, again where the military is very influential, but doesn't come so much in your face, and it has many other successes in economic and social terms. I think possibly for Pakistan and Bangladesh, the way ahead is to weigh the pros and cons of these two models rather than directly look at the Indian template, because that may not be so relevant.
You've said that we should not look at these countries only through one particular viewpoint, that all of them have different opinions. But in terms of our diplomacy, do you think that the Indian diplomacy's manner of picking and choosing who to back in terms of a political party or leaders, do you think that is backfiring?
Well, if you look at the situation today in terms of what is happening in Bangladesh, what is happening in Nepal, what happened in Sri Lanka in the elections, it would appear so. But my answer to that question is that our neighborhood, like all other neighborhoods, is a very, very difficult situation to deal with. No one has a perfect answer, and certainly mistakes are made all the time. There are errors of omission and commission, but we have to begin with the provision, with the premise that your neighborhood is something which is going to require your attention to a very great extent. You will never have a situation with Nepal or Pakistan or Bangladesh or any other neighbor where you can say that now things are going to remain stable forever. It's not a realistic situation. So while I would agree that perhaps there were errors in our diplomacy, perhaps we went too far in favoring one particular party, as the Bangladesh example suggests, but we also have to take into account that it's a very, very difficult situation. No one really anticipated that events would take this particular turn in Bangladesh. Similarly, no one had anticipated that the government in Sri Lanka would be swept away by a popular insurrection, or for that matter, that the architecture in Kabul would fold up in the way it did in a matter of weeks. So there is an unpredictable element, and this is not just in India. If you look around the world, who could have thought that in Syria everything will change so quickly, or that Europe would be in the middle of a war where no one quite knows the way out. So you do face unpredictable situations. But I do think to blame only diplomacy for it would be a mistake. There has to be a certain amount of introspection at the national level, that how completely we bought into this argument that in Bangladesh there is only one opinion, and that is against Pakistan. And therefore any shift from that opinion comes as a great shock to us.
We're going to open up for questions soon, but I have one more question for Nayanima before we do that. Nayanima, in your book, apart from the eyewitness account, you also analyzed the geostrategic issues around Afghanistan. And while the fall of the republic in Afghanistan and the speed with which the Taliban took over may have been unpredictable. But perhaps in the terms of prediction, when America chose to get into a deal with the Taliban, it was not completely unpredictable that this might happen. What is the role of countries beyond our region, in our region?
Well, I would say that, I think Americans really realized very early on in their so-called war on terror that, I think they lost the vision who actually were their enemy. Was it the Al-Qaeda or the Taliban? And very soon, if you see, there are several classified reports that have come out, within the CIA and State Department and others, is the fact that they realized that ousting the Taliban was not really winning Al-Qaeda or, defeating them. Then we saw the entire Osama bin Laden episode. So I think, and that was very clear in the Obama administration itself, and there was this incident once. That time, Vice President Joe Biden had a dinner with President Karzai in Afghanistan, and there he said that, we will never see Afghanistan as our ally. Our ally will always be Pakistan, and we will choose Pakistan 100 times more than we will choose Afghanistan. So, and I think to simply answer your question, they messed it all up, and which is why when they left also, they left it in a complete chaos. I think so their accountability is much more in giving shelter to the Afghans now, and when they now talk about inclusive government, this is the same US that had a so-called peace deal with the Taliban. So what are we really talking about here, right? So, and when they signed that deal, that was the kind of so-called recognition that they gave to the Taliban. So today, I think the most important question is, and I think Russia has taken that step ahead, whether to recognize the Taliban or not. I think they are very soon going to give that recognition. China has already done it, but not officially, but then they have their ambassadors going in and out. I think that is where countries need to take a call, because if you really recognize Taliban, then you can bring them to books and tell them what is it that they're doing in their country, especially with what they're doing with women education and all that. But then I will again focus on the fact that what is it that we are doing as India. We have been the largest, the development partner. Today, when we have our MEA delegation going there and meeting all the Taliban ministers, and then you have the embassy here in Delhi, which is either half open, half closed, the ambassador had left, the tricolor flag is still there, but there are, you're dealing with the Taliban. Let's just be clear, what is it that you want to do? First things first, that's where India should spell out their policy with Afghanistan, and I'd written that in one of my articles. And beyond that, I think countries now really need to take a very serious call that if you don't want to recognize the Taliban, what next with Afghanistan? Because all of them have their special envoys sitting there for Afghanistan. They go, they meet the Taliban ministers, they enjoy the kebabs there, and they come back. That's not how it works. So I think that's the biggest question, and then probably one can think of the next steps.
And certainly, even before all of this is sorted, Afghan students could be given visas more freely. Afghans could be given visas more freely to come to India, because at least the people-to-people relationship should not be boycotted or stopped in some way. I have so many more questions to ask all of you, but I want to be fair to the audience. So here is a hand up here, if we can get the mic here. And please keep your question very brief so that we have time for more people to ask questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the session. My question is, what is your view on the role of the United States under President Biden's administration in India's neighborhood?
Role of United States in?
India's neighborhood under President Biden's administration.
Well, on the whole, I would say that the United States has lost interest in South Asia. After it withdrew its forces in Afghanistan, the kind of focus they had on Pakistan, Afghanistan, that has certainly come down a great deal. Their interest now is more generally on China, and in that regard, they give a certain profile and role to relations with India. I would say that the United States today is at a moment in its history when it is totally self-engrossed.
Your thoughts that the 5th August
No,
events...
please. Other questions, you can continue talking afterwards. No, there's somebody here and then at the back.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, first of all, for this very informative session. The question I had is, how superficial or myopic is this view of labeling like any country in our neighborhood as pro-India or anti-India just on the basis of a result of a particular election?
I would say it's a very myopic view. It's right. It's the right word, myopic. There's a better word, which is narcissistic. If you see the world in terms of pro-India and anti-India, you're a narcissist. Because there are many other issues, many other different shades of opinion, and a good policy would be more empathetic rather than narcissistic.
There was a hand at the back. Can the mic go to the back, please?
Hi, two related questions. One,
We'll take one, please. So
sure.
just pick
All right.
one.
All right. What's the? There's been many attempts in the past for the Indo-Pakistan relationship to improve substantially. In all of you have been observers of that relationship. When were we closest to an agreement on Kashmir, or closest to some kind of peace, and what happened? What's your take on when we were closest to some kind of an agreement?
Well, I will say you'll have to get both the books on Pakistan and read it, but maybe brief answers here.
I think the ambassador would be much better placed to answer that, but from my limited research, certainly the Shimla agreement post-1971, I think people have said we kind of missed a trick there. We had a chance to close everything out, including Kashmir, and we had leverage then. And Bhutto, in fact, I called him an autocrat, but he was also a very shrewd politician. He actually pitched himself as someone who was giving Pakistan its first shot at liberal civilian democracy, which was an idea that appealed to the world at large at that point in time, because Pakistan had never really had that experiment. And since he came from that position, I think we were in a position to have possibly bargained better. Whether that would have kept the peace, I can never say. Because as I said, ultimately, it's the military that calls the shots, the ISI that calls the shots. And for them, peace in the region, peace in Kashmir, discounting Kashmir doesn't really work, because then there's very little else to drive the agenda. The thing we can do now, if I may say, is to not fan the fires. And there have been statements even recently that have been made in the public wanting to reverse partition, for example. Now, that sort of narrative, however absurd it may sound, though nothing is frankly absurd these days, however absurd it may sound, is actually feeding back into this anti-India narrative in Pakistan, because that is what the military picks up and goes to its people and says, look, this is what is being said, and that's why you need us.
Well, I would say between 2004 and 2008, a lot of progress was made in trying to find some arrangement with which both countries could live with. But would it have been a solution for all times to come? Perhaps not. I think we have to learn to live with problems which don't have an easy solution. You know, let's not forget, K in Pakistan stands for Kashmir. They are not going to change their name to find a solution which will satisfy us. It's like India and China. You know, we refer to a border dispute. It's not a border dispute. It's a territorial dispute. The Chinese have claims over the whole state of Arunachal Pradesh. You feel that they have in their illegal occupation, a large part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. There's no technical issue technical approach which will suddenly find a solution. You have to learn to live with these major differences and try to have a relationship which can make sure that these differences don't destabilize it. I mean, that is what you can ultimately hope for with Pakistan, that you reach arrangements which are perhaps durable for the short and medium term, and then hope for the best for the longer term.